holy death. Death in ancient Egypt. Images of death. Death as dismemberment. Salvation from death by piecing together. Part 2. The dead body as membra dissecta was thus a metaphor, a metaphorical image of death that served as a foil for the image of life, into which the dead body was to be transported by carrying out the embalming ritual. The initial, surgical anatomical phase of this 70-day process was not free of violent intrusion. The body was of course not cut into pieces, but for the purpose of preserving it, it was treated anything but conservatively, in the medical sense of the term. The brain was fished out through the nose, and the internal organs were removed through an incision in the side. Only the heart was wrapped up and set back in place. The other organs were placed in canopic jars, vases with lids in the form of an animal or human head. The remaining soft tissue and fluids were dissolved by a solution of natron and resin and pumped out of the body through the anus. This first phase was carried out in the name of purification. Everything foul, that is, everything perishable that could represent a danger to the goal of achieving an eternal form, was removed from the body. For this reason, in the few representations of the embalming ritual, this phase is represented as a purifying bath. The corpse lay on, that is, in a basin, and water was poured over it. The Egyptian word for such a basin is sj, lake, and such a lake is mentioned repeatedly in the accompanying spells. Old Kingdom inscriptions describe the deceased's crossing into the afterlife with turns of expression, such as the following: going down into his house of eternity in very great peace, that he might be provisioned by Anubis and Kentamentia after a mortuary offering is brought for him at the opening of the shaft, after crossing the lake after he is transfigured by the lector priests. Setting out to the western mountain, after crossing the lake while he was transfigured by the lector priest, and the rites were carried out for him by the embalmer in the presence of Anubis. May the crossing of the lake be carried out for him. May he be transfigured through the carrying out of the rites by the lector priest. Crossing the lake and transfigured, that is, being changed into a transfigured ancestral spirit by the lector priest, who recited the funerary liturgies from a roll of papyrus, often go closely together. Both turns of expression refer to the embalming, the one to its physical and the other to its spiritual magical aspect. The phrase crossing the lake refers to passing safe and sound through the purification phase. Then began the phase of desiccation, drying and salting, which extended over about 40 days. Next, the corpse, which was by then reduced to skin and bones, was built back up during the mummification ritual, by anointing it with balsamic oils, that made the skin supple again, by stuffing it with resins, gum arabic cloths, wood wool, chaff and other substances, by adorning it with artificial eyes, makeup, and a wig, and lastly, by wrapping it in mummy bandages of fine linen that were partly inscribed with magical formulas and had amulets interspersed among them. The end result of this elaborate treatment was a mummy. The mummy was more than a corpse. It was an image of the god Osiris and a sort of hieroglyph of the entire person, one that, as the Egyptians put it, was filled with magic. Just as the magic of writing made it possible to make meaning visible and to preserve it, so in the mummy as a symbolic form or hieroglyph, the person of the deceased was made visible and preserved. But far more important than the surgical intervention and chemical treatment was the verbal treatment of the deceased. The inscriptions cited above summarize this aspect of the embalming with the phrase transfiguration by the lector priest. The lector priest literally translated, the Egyptian title means he who carries the book roll accompanied the activities of the embalmers with the recitation of mortuary liturgies that he read from a roll of papyrus. This merging of action and speech, and specifically, speech set down in writing, is entirely characteristic of the Egyptian mortuary cult. In the Egyptian language, this talking therapy for the dead is designated by an essentially untranslatable word that is rendered in English and French as transfiguration. In this treatment, the deceased is constantly talked to. This stream of speech apparently had the function of a connective medium that was deployed, in connection with rituals and amulets, as a means of endowing with life. The deceased thus became a being endowed with consciousness and physical strength, capable of returning to life in a number of forms. One of these many different forms was the mummy, the reintegrated body, the corpus into which the gathered membra dissecta of the deceased were united. By means of these transfiguring recitations, the limbs of the body, which were conceived of as scattered, were gathered, as it were, into a single text, which described them as a new entity.